I gotta make sure yeah, we're currently recording right now. All right. All right. So, yeah, I know. Yeah. All right. So if you are trying to install Node.js, what you want to go to is nodejs.org. It's pretty straightforward. It'll take you to like basically a place where you can install it. Oh, not this actually. What the fuck is this? What is this? Nodejs.org right here. Here's the URL. All you have to do is like click this button, and depending on like your machine, it'll install it either for like Mac for your M1 chips or your Intel chips, or for Windows. I believe it's dynamic like that. So you should just be able to click that button, go through like an installation process, and then if you guys want to verify that you guys have Node.js installed, the one thing you could do is you could check if you have npm installed. If you go to like a command line or a terminal on your system, you could just type npm. If you want to check the specific version of npm, you could do npm hyphen hyphen and then the word version. Another thing you could do is you can also check the actual version of Node.js you have. You'll know you have the LTS version if you have 20.17.0. In this case, what I have is the latest version. I don't recommend you guys install like the very latest version like I have. I just do it so because I experiment a lot of the latest features for Node.js. The LTS version is the latest stable one. So as you're doing development in Node.js, you're less likely to get bugs if you install the LTS version versus like the actual latest version. Just so you guys know. But yeah, I'm gonna proceed with the presentation. So what is the T3 stack? The T3 stack is I'm gonna emphasize opinionated framework made by a YouTuber or tech creator called Theo Brown. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about him, but typically streams on Twitch, also has a big YouTube channel where he talks about web development. I highly recommend y'all like check out like his content. I will say like a lot of like his takes on web development, a lot of his knowledge on web development, I've like adapted. So a lot of the opinions I have are similar to his, with a few exceptions, of course. But the whole point of the T3 stack is to build full stack applications that are completely type safe. So you'll notice as I'm building the Yik Yak clone or the app at the end of this presentation, you'll notice that everything is type safe. So when I make changes to the backend, my front end will immediately know about it. So that's the beauty of this tech stack. It also provides you with like a unified code base. And what I mean by that is that you have only one language that you work with. This entire code base is like from front end to back end is all TypeScript. All the way to the database interaction layer is all TypeScript. And the reason why I'm using TypeScript is because JavaScript is inherently not type safe. TypeScript is also not inherently type safe, but it gives you like a good developer tool to catch type safety bugs. It overall just makes the developer experience like really, really nice. All right. And so the T3 stack consists of these following technologies. This is only a few of what's in the T3 stack. There is a few like mini like libraries that I will not talk about that are used in the T3 stack, but we will be using them under the hood. But I will not be explaining them in good detail. If you do want to like learn way more about the T3 stack than what I cover in this workshop, if you go to t3.gg, I believe, this is Theo Brown's app. If you go to create T3 app here, it'll take you to a link to the actual tech stack itself. This is the documentation that I will be using. I mean, a lot of the content in this documentation is in my workshop. So, but yeah, if you're ever like curious about like why we're using this tech stack in more detail, I would definitely recommend exploring here. Also, if you ever like find yourself encountering a bug or are curious about like how to deploy your app, there's also a lot of documentation in here about like how to deploy your T3 stack application. But yeah, go back here. So in the T3 stack, we have Nextjs. It's a framework built on top of React. It has a lot of nice features that are built in. So if you know, React is it's a client-side application. So what Nextjs adds on to React is a server-side layer to allow you to render your static HTML like super optimally. Of course, you guys are not going to know what the hell that means, but I mean, it comes with a bunch of tools that you would otherwise not have just using React on itself. So if you want to have multiple web pages, for example, like you want to have like a profile page for your user, a separate page for like your like sign-on page, you want to have like a hero dashboard in the same application. The Nextjs comes with tools to allow you to do that by default. Nextjs also has a bunch of other features that I will not be using in this stack. The main things I will be using from Nextjs is creating multiple pages. And yeah, another thing is TypeScript, as I've said before. We will not, you could use JavaScript for this tech stack, but I do not highly recommend it because it basically just removes the whole purpose of using this tech stack, which is the value of having type safe front end to client to server side communication. And then we have tRPC, which I'll be going into heavy detail because it's the main component that connects the front end and back end. Without tRPC, we wouldn't have this type safe interaction between the client, which is the web page, and the server with like our database and our data. And also we have Drizzle ORM, which is the type safe interaction layer on top of our database. In this case, we will be using SQLite, which is a file-based like file-based SQL-based storage. So you'll be able to execute like SQL on top of files to like store data in files. Another thing, we'll be using Tailwind CSS for styling our web page. I won't be going into too much detail on how to use Tailwind, but essentially, if any of you guys are familiar with Bootstrap and how it has classes to style your components, Tailwind is just classes. Whereas like in Bootstrap, you have like actual components you can copy paste onto your web page. Tailwind is just a bunch of utility classes to add margins and padding and color to your web page. And then I guess like one of the most controversial like items in this tech stack is NextAuth. It's authentication specifically for Nextjs. I know a lot of people in the industry do not like NextAuth. We will only be using it because it is deeply integrated into this tech stack. This tech stack it's not old, but it was made like 3 years ago. And 3 years ago, NextAuth was the go-to authentication solution. But nowadays, I would highly recommend you guys use other authentication methods that I will be covering at the end of this workshop so that you can put it in place of NextAuth. But for the sake of simplicity and less setup, I will be using what's integrated into the tech stack. But yeah, that's also like one of the freedoms about this tech stack. You are free to take out pieces of the tech stack and put new things into it. Like for example, Drizzle ORM, an alternative to it is Prisma. It's a more like well-established ORM like database interaction layer. There's also Lucia auth, which I'll be covering at the very end. I won't be like covering how to use it, but I'll just like show you guys documentation on how to use it. There's also Clerk, which is already set up for you, so you don't have to write any code to set up your authentication. And then in regards to like Tailwind, you do not have to use Tailwind for this application. I know some people do not like Tailwind. There are other alternatives to styling your website. There's Bootstrap, like I said before. There's also trying to think. There's also Style X by Facebook. But yeah, it's all up to you. You're free to like plug and play anything into this tech stack. And yeah, so as the creators of the T3 stack were making this tech stack, these were like the three axioms or like basically like ideas they had in mind building this tech stack. So everything in this tech stack is meant to solve an exact problem people have building full stack applications. So one of the issues is authentication, right? So that's why the T3 stack comes with authentication built in if you want it, because a lot of applications you'll be building will need a sign up page, a sign on page, or just registration in general, right? Or users. Another thing is you'll likely be storing data and persisting that data so that when users refresh their page, they don't lose that data, right? Another thing that the creators of the T3 stack also thought about is to bleed responsibly. And what I mean by this is I'm talking about bleeding edge technology. So technology that basically just came out like a few years ago, or like even a few months ago. So everything in this tech stack you'll likely have never heard before. So everything in this tech stack has basically been created in the last few years. It's very new. But of course, we want to use this tech safely, right? Which is what we mean to bleed responsibly. We don't want to be introducing new technologies into this tech stack that may potentially break our application in the future because it's so new. So that's why all the technologies in this tech stack have been created like a few years ago. So it's well established enough to where we can use it in production if we want to deploy this application in the future. And also another thing, as I've emphasized before, is that type safety isn't optional. You'll notice that in this in the CLI that will be used to create the boilerplate for this application, it will give you the option to use JavaScript, but it will not let you actually. You'll see later. But the whole point of this is, like I've said before, like the whole point of this tech stack is type safety from the client layer. So from the layer that the user interacts with your web page all the way to the database layer where Drizzle ORM actually like inserts data into your database. But yeah, I do not like slides. So we will start building shit like right now. Yeah. Also, I will say if any of you guys have Travis Mead, a lot of people say my teaching style is just like him. I'm very, very fast. And I like to explain things on the spot. And the whole point of this workshop is to expose you guys to these technologies so that you can dive deeper into them when you need them. So for example, in our upcoming hackathon, at Shell Hacks, in projects that you'll be doing in like processes of object-oriented design with Lineker or Gerber, or in senior design. I personally use this tech stack. I've been using this tech stack for like since basically the creation of it. I've seen it, you know, when it was first being built out to what it is now. And I will say it's a very reliable tech stack. It will be very confusing at first because there is a lot of things, right? But if you have a team building out this project using this tech stack, if you assign people to different parts of this code base, it'll be significantly easier so that you guys can share knowledge with each other and also build parts of the tech stack like unanimously and like in unison, like as you're building out this entire application for whatever it is. So yeah, the first thing we're gonna do is assuming all of you guys have npm installed, is to do npm create t3 at latest. So make sure you're in a directory where you want to create this project. In this case, I'm using it in my dev folder. This is personally like how I like to organize my projects. But yeah, and then you can add an optional name here. In this case, we're going to create a Yik Yak clone. I will say I am not a good designer, nor am I good at CSS. So the end product will not be like ideal, like to be shipped to production. But yeah, hopefully you guys, actually, let me zoom in on this real quick. Yeah. Oh shit. Oh, you know what it is? Give me a second. I always get this wrong, but we go to, yeah, if you also go to t3.gg and click on the link to the Create T3 app, you could actually just like copy and paste the command to actually create the boilerplate for your application here. So if we do that real quick, go to our terminal, copy paste it. So npm create T3 app at latest. You'll notice it'll ask you, if you didn't provide like an optional name for it, it'll ask you what your project will be named. In this case, we want it to be a Yik Yak clone. So you'll see here, it'll ask you, will you be using TypeScript or JavaScript? If I try to use JavaScript, it's the wrong answer because type safety is not optional. It is mandatory. Also, if you don't want to use Tailwind, you can say no here. In this case, we'll be using Tailwind. You also don't have to use tRPC, but it's such a crucial part of the tech stack that I do not recommend you guys use anything else. And you'll see why. Also authentication provider. This is also optional. We'll be using NextAuth. Make sure you choose Drizzle ORM. Make sure you use Nextjs's app router. And in this case, we will be using SQLite because we don't have to set up a database anywhere online or locally. It'll just be, all your data will be stored in a db.sqlite file, which will like simplify how a database is actually set up. But yeah, I am not going to initialize the Git repository, but we are going to run npm install. Import alias, we can skip that. But yeah, if you guys remember the actual like technology we'll be using for this tech stack, just make sure you actually choose that as it's asking you these questions in this CLI. Also, feel free to help each other if you guys are like confused anywhere. But yeah. Yeah. Also, it might take a while for dependencies to install, so we might be here for a few minutes. It's installing a lot of shit, so, and also depends on the Wi-Fi if that's not so bad. Oh yeah, I kind of forgot about that. On the same Wi-Fi. Yeah, I just realized that might be like throttling the network, but it's fine. It's fine. So an import alias, this is like an advanced TypeScript feature, but you could basically, instead of importing like the exact file path where you want your like whatever you want to import, you can just add this alias. You'll notice it in code. I'll show you guys. Walk around and help people. Oh yeah, no, feel free. Also, I don't know why it's taking so long to install dependencies. That's crazy.
like raise my hand on behalf of other people. I think you should explain what type safety is. And
Yeah.
like, the
Well, they're
importance
gonna
of-
see it like as we code. That was the whole point.
See, okay, but you just kept saying it, so I was just
Yeah, no, I understand.
maybe,
Is it installed?
maybe slow down a little bit. Let's slow down a little.
I don't want to be. It's almost like.
True. Okay.
Okay.
Because I see a lot
Okay.
of people trying to follow along.
Well, I told them it's gonna be hard to. Yeah.
Worry about it. I'm just trying to find a mic for you.
The only mic has that thing.
I know, but there's
yeah.
a port somewhere.
There's a port, really?
Yeah, there should be.
We can check in the back there.
It shouldn't need to bring your own cord. Like it should be here somewhere. I'm not gonna touch that because I feel like that might.
Is it also taking a while for you guys to install dependencies?
Yeah.
Okay, fuck, dude. Yeah.
What I did for my workshop is I told them what to install ahead of time, or I'm going to.
Like this? Oh, I should have, yeah. That's true. But I wanted it to be like the CLI part, I wanted that to be interactive. So
Me, amen. All of the stuff I need for mine is built into Python.
Yeah.
So I just tell them to.
yeah. No, I'm just verifying something.
Hold the show of hands. It's like who's got it. I'm gonna sit on the edge in case I need to get up.
Okay. Okay, there you go. All right, is anyone at this step?
The second step, where is it npm
Okay, okay. Oh, just click enter. Yeah, if you're at the import alias stage, just click enter. It'll just by default use the tilde /. What? Oh shit. Oh, shit. That's just like internal packages that other packages use, you know, that we installed. Yeah. It's to like group files by like specific patterns. It's very useful for like importing and also like working with files because you could like represent a collection of files with a glob with like a pattern basically. Yeah, that's why it's called a glob. But yeah. Oh shit.
Soundstage in the back. I'm gonna try to work on how to fit.
All right, that'd be perfect. All right, I'm gonna wait like 2 more minutes and then I'm gonna proceed with actually building the app. Well, like, yeah. No, actually, if you guys are at the next steps and you guys have like the boilerplate like installed, feel free to like actually like change directories into the folder and then like start looking through. Yeah, basically, yeah. Follow the instructions. Yeah. If I do npm run dev, yeah. Okay. Yes. I used to use Comic Sans for my
I like it. No, I dig it. It looks cool.
yeah, honestly, it was for readability since I was staring at code like for months and months. I felt like it was easy on the eyes, yeah. Oh shit. Perfect. Okay. Okay, perfect. All right. All right, so I'm gonna continue on with the workshop. You'll notice that if you try running the app, so to run the app, you want to run npm run dev. You'll notice we'll get an error saying invalid environment variables. In this tech stack, there's a library to check if your environment variables actually exist. And this is very useful for not only like deploying your application, but in development, because a lot of people, especially if you're working like with a team, they'll clone the project and you'll notice that like for some people, like shit's just broken. And this will help catch that because a majority of the time when your app is not working, it's probably because of your environment variables. And you'll notice we'll need like a Discord client ID and a Discord client secret. These are environment variables that are necessary for NextAuth to work with Discord authentication. So NextAuth allows you to set up authentication with Google, GitHub, and Discord, and also a bunch of other providers. But for simplicity's sake, since I'm assuming a lot of us have a Discord account, we're going to be setting up authentication with Discord. And the first thing we'll need to do is we need to go to a browser here, and we need to go to the Discord developer portal and go to applications. So let me just like see if I just do Discord developer portal. You'll want to go to in the top left applications. If this, oh my God. You're so right. You're so right. Oh, you're right. I thought that was gonna reveal my. Yes. Yeah, this is the annoying part. But yeah.
Zero women fine.
What?
Zero women fine.
All right. So if you authenticated with Discord and you're in the Discord developer portal, you'll want to create a new application. In this case, I already have a Yik Yak clone app, but I'm going to create another one called B2. Oh God, I clicked the terms of service. All right. So the only thing we care about here in this new application that we're creating is we got to go to the OAuth tab, and we want to copy the client ID because that's one of the things we need. Also, let's actually open up VS Code here in our tech stack. So you'll notice there's going to be a fuck ton of files here, especially if you expand this source tab. Don't get too worried about it yet. I will cover what all of these things mean. The one thing we want to do first and off the bat is to configure our environment variables that are missing. In this case, our Discord client ID. All we want to do is copy what we had in the Discord developer portal and copy it here. We also want to regenerate the client secret here, copy it, and also paste it here in our environment variables. You'll notice that there's already a boilerplate for this .env file, so it makes it super convenient for you to just copy paste whatever is on Discord and paste it here in your env file. But yeah, there's also a .env.example here. So if you ever lose this .env file or someone clones it off GitHub, like let's say you publish this on GitHub, if the person clones this project, you're not going to have this .env file, probably because in our .gitignore file, we specifically say not to push that file because it contains sensitive information, like our client secret here. Like you do not want to give this to anyone. I mean, I'm showing it to you guys now, but I'm going to delete this app right afterwards, so you guys can't like, I don't know, use my Discord application for like bad reasonings, basically. But yeah. Oh, another thing we want to do is for authentication purposes, we want to uncomment this NextAuth secrets environment variable. You'll see it's commented right now, but this NextAuth secret environment variable is used for hashing under the hood for authentication. You guys probably might not know what hashing is, but it's very important for ensuring that like no one hacks into your application, basically. And they also give you a really nifty like CLI that you could use here. You can copy paste into the terminal to actually generate a unique key. So the more unique this NextAuth secret is, the better like security you have, basically. So that's why we're using like we're generating a random like 32 character like base64 string. And honestly, for like setup purposes, you could honestly just say 1, 2, 3 here and they'll be fine. But please don't have this like in a production application as your secrets. This is definitely not ideal. But yeah. What else do we do next? So now I'll be like explaining exactly what each of these subfolders are. I will say there is a lot of folders in the root folder. Or a lot of files. The only things you want to care about are what's in the source folder. Because the source folder stands for the source code of your entire application. This will contain all the necessary logic to actually like run your application. You'll notice here we have app, server, styles, and tRPC. Styles we'll probably never touch, mainly because this tech stack already sets up Tailwind for us. But if you want to add any like global styles, that's where you want to add it. So like, let's say you want to style your entire web page to have a background color of black. You could just do body, target the body of your application, and then like set the background color to just black. But in this case, we're not going to do that. But any global styles that you want to apply to everywhere in your application, like let's say you want every page to be black, this is what you would do. But yeah, we'll also have the app folder here. So this is actually the front end component, which is also like kind of misleading. But this is basically like the front end portion of your application. So all the UI logic that you'll be writing will be in this app folder. All the server side logic, so the database interactions and the actual API itself, will be in this server folder here. So we'll have the API folder. So all the API code we write will be in this API folder. And all the database stuff that we do, like the schema and also like any other additional logic we want to perform on our database, will be defined here. And also we have this auth file, which automatically sets up a lot of the authentication boilerplate we need for this application. We will be touching this file like only once, making a few changes. Yeah. And then we have this, finally, this, let me collapse all these. We'll have this tRPC folder, which is just a bunch of utilities for tRPC. We actually will not be touching this file at all, but it sets up like the query client for the front end, a tRPC client for the front end as well here, and a server-side caller for tRPC. But of course, I will not be, since we will not be touching this in our workshop, we will not be going into great detail about it. But yeah, another nifty thing here is if you do end up like adding other forms of authentication into your app, this is where you would define this logic. So let's say I want to add like Google Authentication. You'll probably need to add like 2 new additional server-side environment variables here. This is all defined in TypeScript, if you'll notice, which looks kind of finicky. But like in this case, we're not going to be doing that. But just so you guys know, like you'll be touching this file if you want to add like Google Authentication, GitHub Authentication, or like Twitter Authentication. But we will not be doing that in our application. We'll just be sticking to Discord. But yeah, let's actually run our application, because now I believe we have all our necessary environment variables to actually run the application. So if we, in our application, do npm run dev, so run a development server, that's what it stands for. You'll notice app starts and then is ready in 2.1 seconds. So if I go to Arc here, which is my browser, you could use like Google Chrome or Firefox if you want. This is what I personally use. If I go to localhost, actually, I think I have localhost 3000 here. You just close all these tabs. If I refresh the page, let's. Oh, no, I didn't do. I don't think I installed dependencies. Oh, I did. Oh, what the hell?
Yeah, I got that too.
Oh, you know why? It's because we haven't pushed our database schema. So if you notice, like as we were creating this application, it asks you to run npm run db push. And let me go into good detail about the database here. This is actually a good segue. In our server folder, if you go to db, there will be a file called schema.ts. This is Drizzle ORM. What Drizzle ORM allows us to do is not only interact with our database in TypeScript using this library, but it also allows us to define our schema in TypeScript as well, which is super, super convenient, because otherwise you'd be like going manually into your SQL database and running SQL queries like create table and then whatever it is I'm creating a table for, right? In this case, we have this logic in a like TS file here that makes it super convenient for people to also like see what our app actually contains. In this case, we have a lot of boilerplate here. The only things we want to keep here, we're going to be deleting some of this stuff, but you'll notice we have a users table. We defined like the relationship between like other tables. So for example, users have many accounts. So by default, NextAuth allows you to have multiple accounts. That's why you can set up like GitHub, Google Authentication, and Discord Authentication, because the same user can authenticate with those providers, given that they're using the same email for those providers. But we're actually not going to be worrying too much about like the actual database, like how the actual users in our applications like are stored. The one thing we care about right now is this post table. In this case, we're going to comment this out because we are not going to be using this table. We're going to be creating it from scratch later on. But yeah, this command that it told us to use, let me, oh God, this is like blocking my view right now. How do I drag this? Oh, well, I'm gonna stop our server actually, and we're gonna run what it told us to do that I didn't do, npm run db push. So this will push the database schema defined in TypeScript to our SQLite file. And if that SQLite file in our project doesn't exist, it will create it. So if we run this command, oh, Control C. If you guys don't know how to stop like a process that's like consistently running, it's Control C. So like for example, npm run dev creates like a constant process that runs. That's why you'll see like this thing at the bottom here, meaning it's a constant process. You can cancel that with in this case, I'm on Mac. If you do like Command C, it'll stop. Oh no, Control C. Actually, it should be the same on Windows too, right? Yeah, Control C should stop the process. So any like long-term process that's happening, you can cancel with Control C. That's just a good thing to know. Yeah, I believe we ran db push. But another nifty thing that you should know about this stack is it comes with Drizzle Studio. So Drizzle Studio comes with Drizzle ORM, but it's an interactive editor for your tables. So if you want to see what data is actually stored in your application, you could run npm run db studio. So just like this, npm run db studio, it'll create a URL here that you can go to. If we go to arc and type in local drizzle.studio, it'll give us this really, really nice like admin type dashboard for all of our tables. So right now we have like nothing. These zeros mean there's like no instances of those tables. But if we click into account, we could see like all of our users' accounts, their sessions. So whenever a user like logs in, it creates a session for them that expires over time. We also have like the actual users themselves. So like the name of the user, whether or not they're verified, whether or not their email is verified, like an image, and also the various accounts they have. And also verification tokens, which we'll not be caring about. But yeah, that's Drizzle Studio. So anytime like you want to see like if you actually inserted data into your database, this is a very nifty tool to actually preview that data. Yeah, that's the beauty of this tech stack. It has a lot of things built in, and that's why it's also opinionated, which people might not like. It comes with a bunch of things that are like basically allow you to make a full stack application. But yeah, let's run our application now. Since we pushed the schema, our application should run now. Oh, that's not the right one. I think I closed it. Let's go to localhost 3000. And yeah, so this is the boilerplate for our application. We have a linear gradient background, a bunch of buttons. If we click sign in, oh, I also forgot one thing to configure. And this one's also really annoying. Whenever you're creating your OAuth app with Discord, you have to create a redirect. And this will actually allow like your application to sign in using Discord. I'm gonna copy and paste what I had previously here because it is a very, very long string. Where is our redirect here? Scroll up. Yeah. So I will keep this up for a little bit. Let's go back to our application here. Go to OAuth tab and add a redirect. So this basically tells Discord to redirect back to our application once it's done signing in the user. So it takes us to API auth callback Discord. You'll notice we never defined logic for this route, but under the hood, NextAuth handles that, which is very, very, very nice. So just make sure you have this redirect. If you do not, your application will not allow you to sign in. And yeah, also, when you actually do deploy your application, you'll notice this is pointing to http://localhost 3000. You want to change that in the future to your deployment URL once you deploy it like wherever, on like AWS or Vercel or Cloudflare. So just make sure you change this URL if you actually deploy it. So now, if we actually click, let me just refresh just to make sure. If I click sign in with Discord, it'll tell me to log in again, which is very annoying. My bad about this. This is always the annoying part. Authorize our application. And yeah, now we should be logged in if it loads. Find first. Well, fuck. Okay, what is it saying here? Let me just like make sure everything's actually. Post is not exported as post. Okay. to circumvent this issue, we're gonna delete all the boilerplate code that like comes with this tech stack. I don't understand why. So when I was redoing this workshop yesterday, I did not get that error initially, so that's really weird. Okay. But yeah, this is we're gonna do this anyways. But if you go to let me collapse all these folders. If you go to app and your page.tsx here, this is your homepage. If you're not familiar with Nextjs, pages are designated with page.tsx files. And since this page.tsx file is the direct child of the app folder, it becomes the homepage. That's just like an architectural design that Nextjs put in place for defining pages in your application. So the one thing we want to delete is all this text here that we do not need. We want to keep the main element here, but we do not want these styles that it created. So you also do not want this import here for latest posts, hello, and session. Oh, I know why. It's because we commented out the post table and it fetches from the post table, but we didn't push the post table. So that's why I was airing out. Since we already commented it out, let's just remove all the calls to it. So our page.tsx file should just look like this, very bare bones. If we go to our, actually, I'll leave this up, but
We delete the import link.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I don't know how to drag this thing more.
You can do a high video. High floating, I mean, that's not high floating mini control.
Oh, thank you. Oh my God, lifesaver. Thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, it should be very bare bones. This will basically display nothing on our homepage, which is what we want. We want to start from here. So if we go to Arc, yeah. If we refresh the page, nothing's going on in the console. Also, another thing, when you're developing web applications, I highly recommend you have this console tab always open, because anytime like you're debugging something, a majority of the time that bug is probably going to be displayed in your console here. So anytime you have like a type error or I don't know, something just doesn't compile correctly, it'll show you why in this console. Also, it'll also sometimes show up here. One thing I will say is that Nextjs has both a server-side layer and a client-side layer. This is where it gets complex, and this is why I don't want to deep dive into like these technologies, because you don't really need to know like or have this deep of a knowledge to actually work with the tech. But just know that any errors that show up in this console when you're running the process are server-side errors, and the errors that show up in the browser here in the console tab are client-side errors. That distinction is very important. Oh, so you could right-click. Inspect element. There should be like an option for inspect element or inspect, depending on the browser.
That's it.
Oh, it should be localhost 3000. That's it. Oh, if you're not running the application, localhost 3000 will give you nothing. So make sure you have like a process like this running where it like actively like recompiles when you make changes and stuff. So, but this is npm run dev. Yeah, just make sure you're running that under the hood. But yeah. One thing I want to do now is let's start at the database layer. So we're making a Yik Yak clone, right? So we actually have this posts table here, but I want to make some modifications to it. So one thing we're going to do is that posts typically have like a text. We're going to like oversimplify this, right? We're going to create this post table from scratch again, like this. This create table is a utility to like automatically like prefix your tables with like this Yik Yak clone text. Don't worry about it. Just know that to actually define a table with this text stack, you use this create table function that's defined up here. So in this case, the first argument this create table function takes in is the actual name of the table. So in this case, we want to name it post, right? And then the second argument is a very large object. So you'll notice that for like all the tables here. So we want to store the name of the user that made this post. So in this case, we want to import text from Drizzle ORM SQLite core. This indicates that this name field is a text field, and we're defining it saying that it has a length of 256. Another thing we want to do is actually we don't want this to be named. I'm gonna show you guys like foreign key relations in Drizzle ORM. We want this to actually be the user that created this. So in this case, the user is, we're gonna reference by its ID. So this should be user ID actually. Text user ID, and then this needs to reference user IDs like that. So also you'll notice I'm using Copilot. If you don't have Copilot, please get it. Everyone's a student here. So if you guys don't already know, GitHub has this program called the GitHub Student Association or Students Plan, I think. It gives you a bunch of tools like JetBrains if you're into JetBrains products. It also gives you access to GitHub Copilot for free. And I will say this is a lifesaver. And also a lot of tech companies have like something like this. At Meta, we had basically a Copilot like on all of our editors. And at Discord, we basically were allowed to use Copilot. So yeah, I will say definitely get used to using these tools because it will definitely also prepare you for the job. But yeah. So I defined a user ID field here. It references a user by its ID. And this is very important because it allows us to access the entire user that's signed in that has created this post. It also references the user's ID like this, using this syntax. I won't go too much into like the syntax and why it is. Just know that this is how you actually define a foreign key relation. We also want to define like content for example, because each post in the Yik Yak has like text content. We also, I don't really care about created at or updated at. Let's just make it very simple in that posts only have a user. So a user can create a post, and the post also has content that we can read from. So let's make it very simple like that. Another thing I believe we also have to do is users relations here. So one of the things we also want to do is define that a user can make many posts. And the way we do that is we created a new field here in this users relations variable here that we created. It defines a relation which tells Drizzle ORM that users can have multiple, in this case, accounts and posts, which will make it very easy for us to query these actual like pieces of data. And I'll show you guys that once we actually start writing like the API logic, right? So now all we did was create a new post table with just the user ID and content. We defined that each of these fields have a length of 255. This actually doesn't really matter. You can also omit this if you want, but for the sake of it, let's just keep it that way. The next thing we want to do is that anytime we make changes to the schema, we want to push it to our database. So in this case, our database is in Visual Studio Code here. It's this db.sqlite file that we cannot read. Just note that all your data locally will be stored here. If you delete this file, you will lose your data locally. So that's why when we deploy this application, we do not want to use this db.sqlite file. We want to use like an external like database provider or like a database like on like a VPS or something like that. You do not want to use this file. This is only for development purposes. It makes it super simple. It also saves us the hassle of having to set up an external database just for this workshop. We are going to, so we made changes to our database. We're going to run db push to push those new changes to our database. So it pulls from the schema and then applies our changes. This is how you know everything goes well, right? So now if we want to verify, like if this actually worked, we can go do npm run db studio like we used before. Open up Chrome Arc here. And if we go to drizzle.studio, refresh our page. Oh, I know why. Another thing we also have to do with Drizzle ORM is go to our schema. We also have to define a relationship for our posts. So below our post table, it does exactly what I needed to do. Let me explain. Okay, so sort of like our users relationship here, the only difference is that we have a user field and we specify that users for posts, there's only one user associated with one post. So whenever we query posts, you'll notice that it only has one author. So we're basically saying that posts only have one author, which makes sense. And this also, like the error that we got before, also illustrates that we also need to define like relationships for both sides. So if we define that users can make multiple posts, we also vice versa have to define manually that posts can only have one user, basically. So that's also another important thing. So now if we cancel that DB Studio process, run npm run DB Studio again, we should, if we go to our browser refresh, it should work. Yeah. So now we have this Yik Yak clone post table. We have the user ID, content, and then this user here. So this will be the actual user, the entire user object associated with this post. In this case, there's nothing right now because we haven't defined any logic to insert anything into this table. So there's multiple ways you can go about building applications. You can start by building the front end first, or you can go from the ground up, which is you define the data you're going to store, and then write the API layer or the business logic to actually insert into that database, and then have the client build the client to actually interact with that API, which then interacts with the database. But ideally in a real world application, you want to be developing all of these parts of your application in unison. So that's why I highly recommend, I think this is also what like your later classes will do. Once you get into Poozd, you'll have designated individuals dedicated to just building out the front end, just dedicated to building out the API and the database. You do not want to be building each of these small parts like all as one. So like not everyone should develop the front end. Everyone should have like their own responsibility just to speed up the actual development of the application. And this also happens like in the real world, right? We have designated people that are like experts in like each of these fields to help like accelerate the process of building the entire application out. So yeah, next we'll go to our API layer. So I will be explaining tRPC, which is I would say the most important part of this application because this is the communication layer between our website and our actual database. So in tRPC, let's go here. We have routers. So if you've ever built a REST API, this is going to look like nonsense to you because the way this is basic, what tRPC is essentially is a type safe layer on top of REST. And instead of like hitting a specific endpoint, like let's say your API is hosted on localhost 3001, you don't have to go to /API/user/1 to get the first user in your application. You can just call a function or a method, I should say a method. So in this case, in this post router, this is not the one we're going to be using. We're going to modify this. We have a very basic router called hello. So this is the name of the router. It is a public procedure. I will go into what public and private procedures are. But public procedures essentially mean that anyone can access it. But what procedures allow you to do is define who can access this endpoint, I could say. So in this case, since it's public, anyone can access this route. But if I wanted to, for example, like hide this behind like authentication, I have a protected route. So to create an actual post, I want the user to be authenticated, which makes sense, right? Another thing is that you could chain methods onto procedures. So this is a pattern you'll probably learn like later on, but it's called like object chaining or method chaining. But what this essentially allows you to do is like conveniently define how your API works. So in this case, this is to create a post. In this case, we're in the post router, right? We take an inputs, which is an object here. This object contains the field name. It's a string, and it by default has to be a minimum of 1 character. So this .min call is very important because it prevents people from creating a post with no text, right? Which we don't want. And then here we define that this is a mutation. So in tRPC, you have mutations and you have query. So a mutation makes changes to your database, and a query allows you to read data. So those are very important distinctions. Yeah, they're just conventions so that you could like, when you're looking at the code, you know what it's doing. So in this case, we're doing a create procedure and it mutates, right? Makes sense. If we're, for example, here, we have a method here called getLatest. It's public, so anyone can get the latest post, right? We perform logic here to query the first post in descending order by the created at field. So, and then we return the post if there's no post. So if this fetch call doesn't return a post, then we're just going to return null to the user, right? And also you'll notice it actually uses the query method instead of mutation because we're returning an object. Anytime we return something, I mean, mutations can return something, but ideally, because of how tRPC is architected, mutations shouldn't return anything. They should only perform action. So in this case, this mutation here performs an insert on the post table, and then query, on the other hand, queries a database signified by this db.query method, and then returns the posts, and then null if it is null. But yeah, we're going to be deleting all this except for the hello, because hello is kind of nice. Another thing we want to do, let's keep posts here. And yeah, let's define creating a post actually from scratch. So in this case, let's make it easy, or actually, no, let's make it so that to create a post, you have to be signed in. And so that's why we have this protected procedure. That's why we're using the protected procedure here. Also, another nifty thing, if you're using VS Code, and let's say you don't have something imported, if you type in like what you want to import, like for example, I want to import, I don't have the protected procedure like item imported, right? If I wanted to quickly import it, I could just type out the name. It'll autofill what I want. If I click enter, it'll automatically import it, just like nifty like developer speed feature. But yeah, this is going to be a mutation, and we're going to specify, actually, we want to specify input first, right? So we're going to use this input object, and we're going to pass into this input object a Zod object. So Zod's one of the libraries I didn't explain to you guys, but what Zod allows you to do is define like inputs or outputs using TypeScript. So you'll notice I'll pass in z.object here. And the only thing we want to pass in is the content. You might be asking yourself, like, why don't we pass in the actual user, right, associated with this post? We can derive that using context, and I'll show you that here in a minute. So after the input call here, so on this last parentheses here, I want to use the mutation method, and mutations are the mutation method in this case is a special type of method because it takes in a callback function. If you're not familiar with languages that like, or callbacks in general, a callback is basically it's just a function that gets called later. That's why it's called a callback. So this function that we pass into the mutation function will be called somewhere in the logic defined for the mutation method. But in this case, this callback has two arguments. It has input and has context. So the input will give us our content object here, and it'll also allow us to grab the user that's currently logged in. So this is gonna be very straightforward, but if you wanted to say insert a post, right, we could do ctx.db. Also, the context object allows us to derive the database object here, or the database client that allows us to actually insert stuff into the database. We could do ctx.db.insert, and we have to specify which table are we inserting to, right? We want to insert into the post table. And then, again, with the method chaining, like pattern that we're doing here, we can chain the values object to the insert method call here and specify what we're actually inserting into the database. In this case, if you'll notice, it asks us to insert the content and the user ID. So this is one of the valuable things about Drizzle ORM, is that it tells us exactly what needs to be filled to actually insert this item into the table. So in this case, we can just click enter and then specify that our content will be the inputs, the input.contents object that we get from the z.object. So you'll notice if I, for example, now let's say we modify this API in the future, and now it takes in an actual user for whatever reason, like a user ID. I could specify that it's a z.string here. And then you'll notice if I do input dot, actually, let's go up here. If I do input dot, what's going on here? Oh, I had a period there. But if I do input dot, now we have the user ID here. So anytime you change this input object, so does this input object here in our mutation call. So I could do like test is a z.number. And then now we can access test here. and so forth. You could also nest objects if you want. I don't recommend doing this. Like, let's say you want this mutation to take in another object. You could do that, but it adds a lot of complexity into your code, which I don't highly recommend. So let's delete user ID and we just created there. In this case, we're just going to be inserting this object with just the content. But you'll notice that we also need to derive the user ID somewhere, right? So to do that, we're going to specify user ID here and grab the user ID from the context. So if we do ctx, so what session is the currently logged in user. This is important. So if you do ctx.session.user associated with that session and then get their ID, and then that's it. This is our logic to insert something into our database. Very, very straightforward. It was literally only 4 lines. The only thing we needed to do was specify the input to this mutation using Zod, and then passing in a object with the field content, and specify that this contents field is a string using Zod. But yeah, so now time to call this on the front end. So the front end is arguably like the longest thing that'll take, basically take the most to develop, right? Because you're going to be styling it, you're going to be making it look pretty, but you're also going to add additional functionality that the users can interact with, right? So let's go back to our main page here. In this case, for the sake of this workshop, we're going to be only having one page because having multiple pages will complicate a lot of things. So let me see if I can make this side by side here, because I really want to snap these so that we could see both the editor and what we're writing here. Give me a second. Okay. All right, so the nifty thing about that npm run dev command that we did is that anytime we make changes to the UI, it will reflect on the browser here. So in this case, we're on our homepage. If I add like hello world, for example, here in our homepage, it should recompile at some points, unless it's not. Oh, it's because I'm not running. Okay. Oh, wait, no. It need to be here. Yeah, there you go. Okay, I wasn't running the dev process, but now it is running. So I go back to our app and our code here. Oh, yeah, we see hello world. So one thing we want in our application is we want the users to be able to input something, right? So in our homepage here, we're going to create an input. And it's going to be invisible because we're using Tailwind. What Tailwind does by default is it removes all styles. So we're going to style this to look somewhat pretty. So we're going to add a border, we're going to add some padding. So this is the syntax that Tailwind has to style your application. It's actually kind of hard to see up there, but if we add a placeholder text, let's say this is my input. Yeah. So we have an input box at the top left here. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some padding. So that, yeah, it's not all the way in the top left corner there. Let's add some more padding. But in essence, Tailwind gives you a bunch of utility classes to style your application. In this case, to add padding to your application, you use the P class, and then afterwards, it's going to be like the value you want here. So P10, P8, etc. Another thing is now we want to actually read from this input. So because we're using React, we have to attach state to this input. We have to make it stateful. And to do that, we're going to use a hook called useState. So in this case, let's just do that here. Just rename the text and set text. And by default, this is going to be a string because we're working with inputs here, right? And then we also have to import this. Also, if you have like a function that's not imported, in this case, useState, right? You can do quick fix if you're using VS Code and then import useState from React, or you can manually type it out, whatever you want. Another nifty thing about Nextjs is you have client components, you have server components. Anytime you're working with state here, or you're working with React hooks from the React library, at the very top of your file, you have to specify that this is a client component. This is also why people might not like, what is this? Oh, this needs to not be async. Yeah. If this will work. Refresh. Oh. Oh, you know what? Okay. we can't do this. We need to create another component. Actually, this is a good opportunity to show you guys like the power of React. So in React, ideally, the whole point of React is to split your whole UI into individual bite-sized pieces with condensed logic in them. You don't want to like what I was doing, like put everything into one page. You want to create a very small file or component that contains the logic. So in this case, we're going to create a component for handling like reading from this input and then taking that input and then putting it into our API. So in this underscore components folder, I believe everyone should have this. We're going to create a post inputs component. And we're going to make it a TSX file. Actually, let's not do camel case. Let's name it post hyphen. Right. And to create a component in React, all you're going to do is you're going to export, because the reason why we want to export this is because we want to use it in other files. Export function post inputs, and then return, this function is just going to return an input. There you go. I don't believe, yeah, it's just going to be like that. All right. Let's recreate what we had previously. So in this case, this is my input, border P4, type text. And then if you want, so create a component file here. If we want to import this component into our homepage, instead of this input component that we created here, we can now reference post inputs. And I mean, it renders the same thing since we have the same styles. Yeah. But one thing we want to do now is, like I said, attach state to it. So at the top of the file, since this is a client component and we will be using React hooks, you want to, at the top, add use client. This is very important because now it won't error out in the client that we're using client-specific stuff. Let's import use states from React like we did. And now it's not mad at us. So now if you want to attach this text value to this input, you have to specify that the value of this input is now text. And then we also now need to specify that whenever the text of this component changes, we want to set the value of this text variable to whatever the input is in, that the user puts in the input. So, and to illustrate this, let me add a div, surround this with a div. And below input now, I'm going to add the actual text that we type into this input. So this is one of the powers of React, is it enables like interactivity like almost instantly with a few lines. So now whenever I type into this input, I should see text below it. Or well, in this case, to the right of it. If I wrap this in a div, it should now be below. Yeah, there you go. So if I wanted to like, I don't know, actually I'm not going to cover that. We're just going to work with text here since we're making a Yik Yak clone. But you could take numbers as input, pretty much whatever. But yeah, now what we want to do is that whenever like, let's add a button actually. Oh, I'm going to do that. Let's add a button. And let's say, let's call like submit posts. So let's make it rule. Don't worry too much about the styles. I'm just making it look pretty so that it doesn't look too bad. But yeah, so now we have a button called submit post next to this input. I want this button to actually create a post. So to do that, we're going to use tRPC. And this is the beauty, because I don't know if any of you guys have created like APIs and like interacted with those APIs with your website. You'll notice that it's not type safe. And I'll show you what type safety is here. So if I import our tRPC client that's already defined in our tRPC folder here, it should be called API. And make sure you import API from the tRPC/React folder. The server I will worry about later. So if we do that and we do API dot post, you'll notice that this comes from our post router that we defined a while ago. We do post dot, and now we have create. And since this is a mutation that we defined before, it's going to give us the ability to use the use mutation hook from this create object. And we want to assign this to a variable. So create post equals API.post.create use mutation. And now all I need to do to call this API is on button click, I can pass the onClick property a callback, so a function that gets resolved later on. and then just call the create post dot mutate with the object containing our text. So in this case, we call create post dot mutate, and then this mutate function, you'll notice, takes the exact input that our post API we defined here. So let's say our backend developer for some reason changes this, right? If like now to call the create method, let's say you need to pass in a user ID now, which is a string, right? Now it errors out in the client, and this is the power. You do not get this with that, like by just making a traditional REST API and calling it with the fetch function. Because tRPC like basically tightly couples your front end and back end, you know exactly what happens to your, like you know exactly the changes that are being made to your back end and vice versa, right? Front end to back end to front end. So now let's change that modification because we don't actually want that. If I actually, after I mutate, I want to set text to empty string. What this does is, let me show you. So hello world. If I click submit post, and inspect the console here. Let me make this like this so it's easy to read. You'll notice if it'll say here mutation post.create, and this, if there's no errors in the console here, this means that your mutation passed. But you also notice that our input doesn't like clear here. So if I want to clear the input after submitting something, like creating a new post, so that users can create a new post like right afterwards instead of like sending the same like shit over and over again. Now, if I do like hello, like lowercase world, submit, now our input clears. So it's just a better UX, right? Now, if I want to verify that I actually created a post, right? Let's go back to local.drizzle.studio on the browser here. So I'm gonna go here, expand this real quick. You'll notice we have two posts made by users with this ID, but because we specified that foreign key relation, now I can just click this, and now I know everything about the user who created this post. Of course, I can't see their password because inherently NextAuth will not allow you to see users' passwords or like any other like sensitive information. So like if anyone's like worried about like logging onto your site and like you seeing their personal information, like you could show them this. You don't see anything sensitive other than like their email address, I guess. You will not see their password or like social security number. That's one of the beauties of NextAuth. But yeah, you'll also see like the user that actually like created or that got created by signing into Discord, and it'll also tell you that they signed in with Discord. But if we add like GitHub or Google, it'll show them like Discord, Google, or whatever it is they can sign in with. But yeah, and that basically captures like the essence of like our application. Now what we want to do is we want to display all the posts that other people create as like a good list, right? Of course, the UI looks nothing like Yik Yak because I am not a front-end developer. I'm a full stack developer. I'm not that good at designing things. So let me just put my code base or code editor side by side. What was that? Now what we want to do is we want to create another component specifically for rendering out a list of posts. So you'll notice I have a separate component for taking input and actually creating a post. And I'm going to be creating another component for listing out posts. And this is a pattern you want to adopt early into like learning React, because as you're developing applications, if you stuff all your logic into one file, and let's say you onboard a new member onto your team, onto your project, they will not like seeing or trying to decipher all that logic you wrote. You want to put your components, UI components, like your inputs, the list rendering out like all your posts, for example, into their own components. That's a good pattern to adapt early on. And yeah, so after we render out this list of components, or this list of posts, we'll be done here. I was going to cover deploying this to Vercel, but we might go over time. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate a server component. So the benefit of server components is this term called server-side rendering. So what server-side rendering allows you to do is it allows you to perform API actions, basically. Like, for example, it allows you to fetch like a list of posts before actually rendering your UI. And whenever you leverage the server for all this like logic, it's typically going to improve like your site's performance by a fuck ton. So you want to server-side render things that won't change a lot. In this case, we don't want a server-side render post because if you know posts are dynamic, like as we're developing here, every time the user refreshes the page, they could see new posts. You want a server-side static content. So let's say like a text for a blog post. That'll typically remain static for like probably like months, right? You're probably not going to rewrite an entire blog post, right? That's something you want to server-side render. In this case, I'm only showcasing you guys how to server-side render just for the sake of it, because it's good to know. All right, so you'll notice I will not be doing use client at the top because this is a server component. So implicitly, components you write will be server components, which is kind of confusing, especially if you're learning Nextjs for the first time. So you'll notice instead of importing from tRPC/React, we import from tRPC/server because it actually calls our API from the server, which is more efficient than calling it on the client. So in this case, actually, we need to write the logic for that in our post router here. So in this case, I want to list out all my posts. I like to call it like all, like something simple, or you can say all posts. But I'm going to call this new method all, and let's say everyone can call this this method. We're going to pass in an async callback here, and then we're going to define the logic for it. So in this case, since this is a query, it's not going to require inputs because we're not going to allow the users to like filter posts by like whatever it is. We're just going to say return await ctx.db.query.post.findMany. So what this line of code does is it uses our database client to interact with it. It queries the post table, and then it just gets all of it basically. There's also find first if you just want to find one in your database. This will just return like the first post ever, which we deleted like the logic for. But we want find many because we want to show all of it. Yeah, so that was pretty simple, right? Getting all of our posts from our database. So now to call it here, I want to do API dot, actually I want to do this. Const data is equal to API dot post dot all dot use query, or actually dot all, and call it, I think. And if I hover over this, you'll notice this returns a promise. And this is because this function here, the server component needs to be async. And then we want to await API post dot all. And then now, if we hover over it, you'll notice it's an object array. So the object having the user ID field, which can either be string or null, the contents, which is either string or null. And if I want to render out all my posts now, I have to use React. So I have to use the map property for arrays in JavaScript. And I need to, let's create like divs for each post. Why not? I think I'm missing. Oh, wait, no, I'm writing this wrong. Data.map posts equal. And then I want to render out in each div post.content. And then, oh yeah, in React, whenever you're rendering out a list like this, so that map property is attached to any like object that's iterable. I'm not going to go into detail with what that means, but if it's an array basically or a list, you can map over it, and it transforms everything in that array into a div. Essentially, that's what this logic is doing. But in React, when you're rendering out a list like this, every like child of this list, so in this case, every div needs to have a key, which under the hood helps React maintain the order of this list in case that list changes. In this case, the list will change because we're going to add more posts, right? Every time the user adds a post, it's going to append that post to the end of the list. So without this key property, the ordering might get fucked up. So in this case, let's just say the post is the index of the array here. Like the key is the index of the array. You don't want to do this. Although what we should be doing is we should have a unique ID for each post, but I didn't define that unique ID for each post. So this kind of makes it complicated, but whatever. Just don't, whenever you're making a production grade application, do not use the indices of an array as a unique key, because like in reality, like your array indices are not unique. Like if you think about it, because if I delete an item and add an item, the ID of that item in the array will map to like a different item every time like you change it. So definitely don't do that. And now we need to call this post list in our homepage. So if we go to page.tsx, so below the input, I'm going to render out the post list. And you'll notice our homepage is looking really clean, which is how it should be. Your code should be this clean, ideally. When you make more complex React applications with really heavy logic, like let's say you're creating an admin dashboard with like a bunch of charts and you want those charts to be super, super interactive, like drag and drop, you will most likely not accomplish this level of cleanliness. But for small applications, your code should look like this. And yeah, one thing you'll notice is, although we render out all the posts that we've created here, if we type and add a new post, oh, it actually does, wait, does it refresh? Oh, no, it doesn't. Oh, wait, we had this before. Oh, but you'll notice that like every time we add a new post, it doesn't like append to the end of the list. So what we want to do is we want to requery this all these lists of posts dynamically. So every time we add, oh, sorry, I need to delete this command. Anytime we add a post, right? We want to fetch the latest one to then display at the end of the list. So to do that, we have to modify our logic for creating a post. So if you remember, we use this use mutation hook. We want to pass in an object into it. And this object gives us a bunch of these methods that allow us to handle what happens if this mutation fails, if this mutation settles, or a bunch of different things. But whenever this succeeds, we want to do this. We want to invalidate. Actually, this is not the way you do it, but you need to import this like utility hook from, where is it? API.use utils. Yeah. So there's this hook called, it comes from the API object that comes with the tech stack. It comes with this use utils hook. And what this utils hook allows us to do is it allows us to invalidate a query. And so what invalidating a query means is it marks the query as stale. And the reason why we want to mark it as stale, like in this case, the all query, is because it has new data. The data has changed. So anytime, you'll hear this terminology a lot, anytime someone talks about a stale query or stale data, that means it has changed, but has not updated to the user. In this case, under the hood, we want to call utils.post.all.invalidate. So what this will do, oh, and we need to add the void here. Actually, no, we need to make this async and then await it. So what this will do is it will invalidate that query we called to the post list. And under the hood, we requery all the posts to then like update to the user that latest post that we created. But you'll notice this will not work. And also, I don't know if you guys noticed, but every time like I make changes, it actually like requeries the posts. So like we didn't like refresh the page, but like there's new posts here. That's because every time you make changes, it essentially refreshes the browser, which is effectively requerying the data. So that behavior is not going to be accurate to what it is in prod. That's because we're in the dev environment. But you'll notice, let's type something unique here like bot. It doesn't actually require it. And that's one of the bad things about server-side rendering a dynamic list. Because this query is called on the server, we can't invalidate the query because it's happening on two different environments. This query is happening on the server, and we're invalidating a query that executed on the client, but this query that we're invalidating didn't execute on the client. So we need to undo what we did. So instead of using tRPC or the API object from the tRPC/server folder, we want to use the one from the clients. And or React, I mean. Also, you'll notice I'm talking about like front-end client, and also like a web page. When I talk about those three terms, it's basically the same thing. What I mean by the client is what the user sees, and what I mean by like, actually, never mind. I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, instead of you'll notice that we have to use that hook syntax. We can't do the API.post.all. We have to do API.post.all.useQuery. And then we can't also use, another thing is client components cannot be async because it cannot await promises. Like the browser cannot await promises, I guess. Something like that. It's very complicated, but that's just like how Nextjs is architected. Client components cannot be async. Another thing is whenever you fetch data on the client, it could crash. So you'll notice here that data.map is not a function. It's because this data object could be null or undefined because let's say like your internet like crashes, right? As you're creating this application or as you're running this application, you need to handle the state for like when the network goes down and you can't actually fetch that data, right? So one thing you need to do is you need to do like if data. So there's like two main states, I think. So your data could be loading. So in this case, you want to handle whenever this data is loading. So in this case, in this component, we're going to return a div with loading. Another thing is you also have to handle if this error is out. So if data dot error, let's return like the error message. But we also have to handle, I think, if data dot is pending, I guess. I think, oh no, we should use is pending. HHJ recently changed the APIs and now it's like super weird. Oh. Wait. Let me do something complicated here real quick. I'll explain to you what I'm doing right now here. It's a term called destructuring. Some programming languages have this, but you'll notice that like in JavaScript, you could like objects have different properties, right? If I want to immediately access those fields instead of like doing data dot this, I can just immediately destructure it. So the alternative to destructuring directly like from the return type here is I could rename this something like test, and I have to do test dot is pending or is fetching or is loading. But to simplify all that and not having to have like a unique variable for whatever it is I'm returning, I could just immediately grab what I need. So in this case, data is pending an error. And then immediately handle those cases. So in tRPC, when you handle these cases, like if the data is pending or if the data is, it crashes or something like that, like you don't get the data, you'll notice that now our data cannot be null. Like, let me show you. If I remove this if error check, we get an error because we aren't handling the error state, right? Which isn't type safe. So this then always rolls back to the whole idea of this tech stack being type safe is not being like type safe isn't optional. Type safe is mandatory. You cannot escape type safety basically. But now, assuming that our input invalidates the query on the client, and now we fetch this data on the client. Now, if I add a new post, like hello 3 times, let's say that. Hello. You'll notice now it displays our new post. And yeah, this obviously like the UI could be improved, but for the sake of this workshop, I'm not going to have you guys watch me like write a bunch of CSS styles to make it look pretty. That's up to you guys. But now you guys have the core functionality and basically the whole idea of why this tech stack is so powerful. There's also like I've covered like a little bit of nuances of each of these technologies, like client and server components, but that's up to you guys to deep dive into these technologies. But yeah, I do have like already a more complex and coded up version of this. I will show you guys how to get there. Let me go to Arc real quick here. Expand it. If you go to, I'm assuming if you guys don't already have a GitHub account, please make one. You're going to need one for your future classes. But I think, do we have a link for this in like /links? Yeah, you should. But we have in our like Nighthacks org, we have a workshops folder, and all the code that people write for all the workshops will be in this repo. If you go to the 2024, the 2025 folder here, the code that I wrote yesterday, actually no, like a few days ago, when I was coding up this workshop, will be in pre-hackathon, and it will be in this full stack web development folder. I also have my slides here. I didn't really like go into depth about like anything in these slides, but if you want to look at the slides that are here, I will say this example is a lot more complicated. It has likes, it has replies, and I really wanted to cover that in this workshop, but I don't want to go over an hour and a half. But definitely look into this if you want to like look at a more complicated example. The UI is not going to be great, but there's going to be a lot more functionality. And yeah, do we have any questions? Yes.
Can you pull up under routers and post.ts? I haven't ever seen.
So routers, post.ts.
When I did a public procedure, it, oh, I did not clearly.
Yeah, might be just like a minor syntax error. Yeah.
Oh, there, now everything's working. Oh, and then can you go back to post.this, because.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then my post is, it has an underline in data.map my post. The only error I have in anything is that post doesn't exist. It says cannot find name post.
Oh. Up here? Like you're getting this is erroring out
No,
there?
actually, I have no error there.
It's here?
Yeah.
Whoa. We could talk about this after, but does anyone have like any like high level questions or anything like high level about the tech stack and like why we're using it and whatnot? No. Well, that basically concludes my workshop. I have this room till 7. This could be time to like socialize with everybody, or if you have questions about like whatever about like, I don't know, like internships or whatever, you can come to me or about like technology in general. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you guys for coming.